The night the moon hung lower than usual over Dubai, the city seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew the world's most guarded heart was about to confess a truth it had hidden behind royal walls for years. Beneath the weight of crowns and responsibilities, Sheikh Hamdan stood alone in the stillness of his chambers, staring out across the endless skyline that bore his name. Duty had always been his shadow, but destiny, oh, destiny had worn her smile. The crown had chosen him, but his heart had chosen her, and between those two choices lay a love story too powerful for time and too sacred for the world. He first saw her not as a subject of his kingdom, but as a revelation. She wasn't adorned in jewels or protocol, yet her presence commanded more respect than any throne could offer. Her simplicity disarmed him. Her silence spoke louder than flattery. And when she smiled, it felt as if God himself had placed light in human form. In that single glance, the future Crown Prince of Dubai forgot the rehearsed perfection of royal life and remembered what it meant to feel. She was not a part of his plan, she was his purpose disguised as coincidence. He tried to fight it. For nights, he convinced himself that a ruler must not surrender to emotion. He buried his longing beneath poetry and prayer, convincing himself that duty must always come before desire. But every poem betrayed him. Every verse he wrote became her portrait, every word carried her name between the lines. The more he resisted, the deeper he fell. It wasn't an infatuation, it was destiny unfolding in silence, beyond his control, beyond reason, beyond power. When their worlds finally collided, it wasn't in grandeur but in grace. She didn't kneel before his title, she stood before his truth. She saw the man beneath the robes, the dreamer behind the discipline. She didn't see a crown, she saw a soul searching for home. And in that gaze, he felt something he had never known, freedom. Not the kind the world gives you when you rule it, but the kind you find when someone truly understands you. That was the day Sheikh Hamdan realized that love, when pure, is not rebellion, it's revelation. Their love was never loud. It lived in glances that said what words could not, in shared silences that stretched longer than any conversation. They met in fleeting moments, where time paused out of respect for their connection. Sometimes, they would walk beneath the moonlight, their shadows intertwined on the marble of royal gardens. She would tease him about his poetry, and he would smile, knowing that every poem was written for her even before she came into his life. But destiny, no matter how divine, often comes with trials. The world around them was not ready for a love that defied expectations. Whispers began. Walls tightened. The duties of royalty clashed with the desires of the heart. There were times when he wished he could remove his crown and offer it in exchange for a single day of peace beside her. Yet even when distance separated them, love became their language. He would send her messages written in metaphors, poems disguised as prayers, verses that only she could decipher. He wore his duty with dignity, but he carried her memory like a crown upon his soul. Every decision he made for his people carried traces of her compassion, every act of generosity bore her influence. She had awakened in him not just love, but purpose. Through her, he discovered that ruling wasn't about power, it was about heart. She became the unseen queen of his conscience, the muse behind every noble choice, the quiet voice that whispered through his silence. There were nights when he would retreat to his writing desk, ink staining his fingers like fragments of confession. He would write her name, then cross it out, not because he wanted to erase her, but because the world was never meant to know. Their love belonged to the divine, not to headlines or history. In the privacy of his verses, she was eternal. She existed between the commas and sighs, in the pauses that carried more meaning than the words themselves. He once wrote, "The desert taught me patience, but she taught me peace."
Sometimes when the palace lights dimmed and the city slept, he would wander through the quiet corridors where their memories once lingered like soft perfume. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, each corner whispered her name back to him. He could almost see her there, her gentle presence like moonlight brushing the edge of his solitude. The world would never understand what she meant to him. To them, he was a prince, a ruler, a symbol of perfection. But to her, he was just Hamdan, the man who longed, who dreamed, who bled quietly for love that was never meant for display. In her arms, he was no longer royalty, he was simply real. There were moments during his travels when he would stand before oceans or mountains, and feel her near him. It was an illusion, it was love refusing to fade. The wind carried her laughter, the stars mirrored her eyes, and even in foreign lands he felt her warmth guiding him through the chaos of fame. She had become his compass. When he faced the storms of leadership, he drew strength from her memory. When he faltered beneath expectation, her voice reminded him that love is the greatest crown a man can ever wear. And so, he wore it quietly, hidden beneath layers of duty, but blazing within every choice he made. He often wondered if destiny had been too cruel or too kind. Cruel, for separating them in sight, kind, for binding them in soul. Their love existed outside the reach of the world's hands. Even when time built walls between them, their hearts found windows. She would read his poems from afar, understanding every hidden meaning, every sigh disguised as rhyme. And though miles apart, they shared a silence deeper than any conversation. It was a bond written not in ink or vows, but in the eternal handwriting of fate. In the gardens where he once walked with her, he would sometimes pause to watch the petals fall. He saw in them the symbol of their love, fragile yet everlasting. No matter how many seasons passed, the flowers always returned, just as his thoughts always returned to her. He realized then that love doesn't vanish when it cannot be seen, it only grows quieter, wiser, more sacred. And in that quietness, he found peace. It was as though God had whispered, "You cannot lose what was written in the stars." There were days when his advisors would see a distant look in his eyes during meetings. They would assume he was thinking about the nation, but in truth, he was remembering her smile, the one that had once melted every wall within him. She had become his sanctuary in the chaos, his poetry in the noise, his forever in the fleetingness of life. Even surrounded by gold and grandeur, her memory was the only treasure that mattered. He didn't need to speak of her, because love that pure doesn't need explanation, it simply lives, like air, unseen but essential. As time went on, he began to see her reflection in everything beautiful. The way sunlight kissed the towers of Dubai reminded him of her warmth. The stillness of dawn reminded him of her calm. Even the falcons soaring across the desert sky carried echoes of her freedom. She had become inseparable from his world, a living spirit within every poem he ever wrote, every act of kindness he ever performed.